The Reverend Spy by D P Denton Chapter 3. The Reverend Daniel Phillips stood with his back to that brick wall for a long time, lost in his thoughts. Some who knew him passed and wondered at his strange attitude, but on December 8, 1941, many were acting strangely. He does not know how long he stood there alone with his thoughts and prayers, only that when he started down the side street toward his parked car, the shades of night were gathering about, and there were some dark places along the way. When he was still some distance from the car, Dan became aware that someone was right behind him, and glancing back he was surprised to recognize, even in the dim light, the civilian man who had been in the recruiting office that day, and whose actions had so stirred his curiosity. "Don't look around," came a low voice. "Just walk on slowly and talk quietly. Do you really want to serve your country?" "Yes," answered the completely puzzled preacher. "I want to do everything I can to help my country in this awful time." "Are you afraid of danger and perhaps death?" "If I was, I wouldn't have volunteered today." "Can you keep a secret from everyone else?" "That's an important part of a preacher's work." "Would you be willing to have your entire life changed and maybe become an oddball among your family and others for your country?" "If by doing that I can help to keep my country strong and free, I will gladly do so." By that time they were nearing Dan's car, and the man behind already seemed to know which one it was. "Tomorrow at 8 a.m. you will receive a message asking you to come to a certain address to help a man. Bring your Bible and whatever else you carry when you do pastoral calling. Come alone and try not to arouse suspicions. Above all, you are not to tell anyone of what you are doing or why." The voice ceased, and Dan glanced around only to discover that there was no one there. Puzzled, perplexed, curious and yet challenged, he drove slowly toward home. What could it all mean? Here he had been completely beaten by his rejection for regular army service, but now a feeling of excitement, even of exhilaration, took hold of him. Perhaps he could do something for his country yet. He found himself wanting to tell someone, but then remembered the warning of the mysterious man. Driving along toward home, he sealed his own lips on the subject, never to speak of it to anyone. Promptly at 8 o'clock the next morning, a strange cab stopped before the minister's house. The horn blew, and the preacher was quick to answer the summons. The cab driver, who didn't look at all like one except for the cap and the car, said, "Reverend, they wanted me to stop by and tell you that there is a man who needs to see you real badly at 907 Green Street. It's a matter of life or death, and they want you at once." With that, the cab sped away and left the preacher mentally recording the address in his mind. How many facts, figures, faces, and formulas he was to record in that mind during the next few years, because he did not dare to write them down, he did not realize then. But 907 Green Street was only one of the many mental recordings he made which affected the destiny of our nation. "What was that about?" queried Laurie, his wife, when he went back in. "Some poor fellow in town wants me. Must be bad sick. The cabbie said it was a matter of life and death." A few minutes later, Bible in hand, Dan drew Laurie close to him as the boys hugged them both as best they could. It was a special moment for him, for he sensed that from this day on, everything was going to be different. "Darling," he whispered, "our country is in real danger, and none of us know what the future holds. But I want you to know that whatever comes, or whatever happens to us, I appreciate you more than I can ever tell you, and I love you and the boys more than I can ever express. Please, keep faith in me, and even if you don't always understand, try to be patient with me, and try to help the boys to understand." Then, trying to shake off the seriousness into which he had fallen, and to stop any suspicions that might get, he tilted her chin up and gave her a good kiss, gave each of the boys a laughing slap on the back, and walked out the door to face a way of life from which he could never completely return. 15 minutes later, the door of 907 Green Street opened slowly, and a maid, who certainly did not look the part except for a cap and an apron, invited him to enter. Once inside, he was ushered into a back room where all blinds were pulled tight, but in the dim light he recognized once again the strange man to whom he had talked yesterday. "Mr. Phillips," he began, "how old are you?" Dan was quite sure that the man had seen his record the day before and knew his age, so he jokingly replied, "I'm 21 plus." The man broke into a quiet laugh. "Fine," he said. "That will be your number from now on. You are 21 plus." Dismissing the maid, who had already taken off her cap and apron, and another man who had been standing in the background, he shut the door tightly and motioned Dan to a chair. The next several hours were filled with questions and instructions, all of which we cannot reveal at this time. Some of them went like this: "Are you still willing to offer yourself for the most dangerous kind of work? Are you willing to have 2 lives and 2 personalities, even though it may separate you from those you love? Can you operate secretly and alone and never tell anyone, not even your wife, what you are doing? Can you find an excuse for being away from home for long periods of time without arousing suspicion? Can you change your plans suddenly and answer a call without giving yourself away? If it becomes necessary to move suddenly and quickly, will your wife and family go along without being overly inquisitive? Can you obey orders without questioning them? Are you willing to die in this service if necessary?" Among the many things he was told, only few can be revealed. Among them were: "You will be part of a number of special civilian agents who will work under the Federal Bureau. None of them will know the others, and each of them will be known only by 2 people, the agent under whom they work and Mr. Big, the head of the Bureau. No one else will know about you or your connections, and each of us is sworn to absolute secrecy until the other 2 are dead. Thus, our identity will never be known while we live. You will receive no remuneration, no pay, no pension, and no help with your assignments except what we can give you without revealing your identity with us or our connection with you. You will receive some help, but not through regular channels. You will make no move, go nowhere away from home, make no plans without keeping us informed, so we will know how to contact you. We cannot guarantee you anything except the opportunity to help save your country. The attack on Pearl Harbor has simply brought out what Mr. Big and his staff had already been warning us about for a long time. The enemy is already at work inside our country, and there is more than one. The worst enemy is one with whom our government is now cooperating. So you will have to be very careful. Even though we have just now become active in the war, our country is already full of enemy agents, and we are in grave danger. You, 21 plus, are now in the most dangerous work a man can do. Your assignments will come to you one at a time, and we will try not to disrupt your regular work any more than necessary. Stay at home, carry on your church work, but keep your eyes and ears open. Study every piece of mail that comes to you. Watch the papers. Pick up hitchhikers. Listen to beggars. And be ever on the alert for things that might be important. I do not know when we will call you first, but things are going to move mighty fast, and I have an idea that you will be in the thick of things pretty soon. I will contact you with instructions. When you receive them, learn them at once so that you will not make a mistake. and never write them down. There is a number that you can use if you need to contact me. Memorize it before you leave this room. Never tell anyone about it. All calls to this number are prepaid and direct, so that you never need to identify yourself. When an answer comes at headquarters, just say, 21 Plus is calling 35, and I'll be on in a little while. At the close of this meeting, the Reverend Daniel Phillips, alias 21 Plus, walked out, an innocent-looking preacher, Bible in hand, but with a double personality and a twofold task. One involving the destiny of immortal souls, and the other involving the destiny of his country. Chapter 4. Several days passed after Dan's initiation into his new life, and as 21 Plus, he kept his eyes, ears, and mind open for any sign that he was to be used. In the meantime, he reviewed all that he had ever learned or read on surveillance work and its related subjects. Lori thought he was spending an unusual amount of time in his study and perhaps wondered at his rare nervousness. But she was a faithful wife and had confidence in her man, so held her peace. Dan, on the other hand, remembered much of what he had read in detective stories as a boy, and was especially glad for the amateur detectives course that he had completed before his conversion. In the early days of his Christian life, he had destroyed both the books and materials along with the diploma, but now he found himself glad for what he had learned. Monday morning, December 15th, 1941, Dan was working in his yard when a pickup truck pulled into his driveway. "Hello," cried the driver. "Are you Reverend Phillips?" "Why, yes, I am," was the surprised reply. "What's on your mind?" "Well, Reverend, a gentleman came into our station this morning and paid for a service job for your car and paid me to come and tell you. Said he liked to do things for the preachers. Oh, yes, he said to tell you to be there exactly at 1 o'clock. And with that, the truck sped away. Dan had started to object, but had caught himself, remembering that he was now subject to receive messages in many unexpected ways. He had other things planned for 1 o'clock, but sensed that this might be his first call to duty as 21 Plus. At 1 o'clock promptly, Dan pulled his old car into the service station, and an attendant waved him through the doors and onto the grease rack. As he alighted from the car and turned to walk away, a familiar voice said, "If you would like a place to sit down while you wait, there's a nice bench over in that corner. This is my car on the other rack, and I'm going to sit over there." Dan managed to keep his surprise hidden and thankfully accepted the invitation to sit down while waiting, for the voice was that of his director, Mr. 35. Hardly had they gotten seated in the secluded corner when Mr. 35 asked, "Do you know anything about the town of K?" "Quite a bit," was the reply. "Do you know anything about the town of C?" "Just a very little." "Would you be willing to move to the town of C and pastor a church there?" Dan's surprise was almost more than he could keep back. For how could a federal agent know about the churches, or how could he have anything to do with the placing of a pastor? But Dan tried to prepare himself for any kind of unexpected development, so he kept a blank look and answered, "If that is where I can best serve God and my country, I am ready to go." "Then listen carefully," and 35's voice showed the seriousness with which he viewed this bit of business. "It is pretty certain that we are going to build an ammunition plant halfway between K and C. If it will be the most powerful explosive in existence, and both our enemies and our so-called friends will be trying to get in on the inside of our secrets. We're going to need a man nearby who can circulate among the people without arousing suspicion, and who can keep us informed about things there. I have been ordered to transfer immediately to K and begin getting ready for the visitors that we know will soon be coming. But, interrupted Dan, how can I get called to a church there? I can't just go and ask for it, can I? The trace of a smile flitted over the corners of 35's mouth for a second and then was gone. That's where I meddle in church affairs, he said. You see, I was in C yesterday, just looking around, and I attended a church there that does not have a pastor. After the service, the leaders were very friendly and told me that they needed a man who would like to have an aggressive young man. I told them that I just happened to know such a man and would tell their district superintendent about him. That they very innocently gave me the name and phone number of the superintendent. Do you know Dr. D? Oh, yes, came the amazed answer. He and I are good friends. Would you be willing to accept an appointment to C under him? Why, yes, if that is where I am needed. Okay, just get ready. I am sure he will contact you in a few days. Oh, I see my car is ready, so I must go. Then, at the approach of the attendant, he extended his hand and shook Dan's vigorously, saying, It has certainly been a pleasure to meet you, Reverend Phillips, and I deeply appreciate our conversation. It has been a big help to me. As he entered his car, backed out and drove away, the attendant said to Dan, You preachers get a chance to help people in a lot of funny places, don't you? We sure do, Dan replied, and tried to act as though this was just another ministerial activity. But down inside his heart was pounding. At last he could begin to see the way in which he was to serve his country and God at the same time. On his way home, he tried to plan what he would say to Lori and how he would explain their sudden move, for he felt sure that they would be moving real soon. Then he decided just to tell her the truth without revealing any of the source of his information. So that evening, when they were alone together, he said, Lori, I have something important to tell you, and I hope you will cooperate without asking too many questions. I heard today that the church in the town of C is out of a pastor, and that I have been recommended to Dr. D, the superintendent. I have a feeling that he is going to ask me to take it immediately and move there as quickly as possible. I think I ought to take it, and I hope you feel the same way. Lori was quiet for a few seconds and then, slipping her arm around his neck, said, Dan, you were already a preacher when I married you, and I promised both you and myself that I would go wherever the Lord sent you. I don't understand why you should be in such a hurry, but if you feel you ought to move tomorrow, I'll try to get ready. Tuesday dawned, and Dan was not surprised to receive a call from Dr. D, asking if he could come to see him that afternoon. By 2 p.m., he was in the city and at the home of the superintendent. By 4 p.m., the plans had been completed. The church leaders in C had been notified and had agreed, and Dan and Lori began to plan for an immediate move. Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday, and Thursday night were all very hectic times. But by early Friday morning, a truck was loaded, and by late noon, they were on their way to a new pastorate, and for Dan, some very dangerous but important service to his country. Their arrival was not heralded all over the town, for that was the way Dan wanted it. But he saw immediately that he was in a very strategic location for both jobs that were his. The parsonage was very large with many rooms, and it sat in the heart of the little town, right where one could keep in touch with all that went on. Amidst the labors of unpacking and getting settled in their new home, Dan's mind was filled with guesses as to what the future held for him in the service to his country. He did not have very long to wonder.